Wuthering Waves is an interesting story in the gacha space. For a game that had a rocky launch and an equally tepid reception at first, it managed to bring itself to a state that doesn't compare to its earliest iteration. This is because Kuro Games, as they have done in Punishing Grey Raven, has continued to up the ante rather than remain stagnant with its initial success. However, just because the game has made several leaps in terms of its presentation and combat, doesn't mean it's not without flaws. Last year, as Wuthering Waves celebrated its first anniversary, it was subject to a poor reception due to its flawed celebration that set up a lot of expectations from players that weren't met appropriately, thus continuing the curse of the first gacha anniversary that sometimes gets floated around. Because of this, all eyes are on them as we come close to the game's second anniversary. So taking Kuro Games' history of solving issues with their games into account, as well as their tendency for providing players with plenty of rewards for misgivings, will this anniversary prove to be a much better experience than the last? My name is Psyche, and I want to dive into the topic that makes players wonder, what will be different this time? And perhaps answer the question, how many rewards will this anniversary give? Is the feedback from the first one taken into a consideration? Let's find out. While I don't think there can be a perfect gacha game, Wuthering Waves is up there among the quality of console titles, and it's one I would have no problems recommending just based on my own experience. I'm here to give an overview of the history of the game's first anniversary and how it plans to improve from here. First, we'll have to take a brief look at its history to see what the fuss is all about. It all began with the release of version 2.3, which brought with it the first anniversary celebration. Players had high expectations from this game's anniversary in particular, and for good reason too. Who could forget that the fact that not even halfway through the year, they gave away the Electro DPS unit Shanli Yao. Not to mention, they have had plenty of mini-events where players were rewarded with both standard and premium pulls and a decent flow of premium currency. Alright, with that kind of history, you would expect the anniversary celebration to give a bunch of surprises, right? Well, the stream did kick off on all cylinders at first, with Kuro announcing a few changes that would be heavily praised, such as the free glide skins, a birthday system which allows you to pick your favorite resonator to celebrate your birthday with, and a feature that allows you to reroll your echo's main stat, reducing the grind needed to acquire specific echoes to optimize character kits. Emotions were high and praise was just going through the roof, but then the hype started to die down with a few of the upcoming announcements, such as a silly cube event that didn't really contribute to anything story-wise. No new bosses or echoes to celebrate the occasion, and, most outrageously, a huge rerun event in which players would pull for several of the previously featured characters, including characters from the first version of the game. Surely, with all the banners players would have to pull for with the anniversary, Kuro would provide players with an equally great amount of pulls, right? Well, that's where the shoe dropped for the Wuthering Waves player base, as after the stream was done, it was found out that the total amount of pulls for this crazy amount of banners was 20, and only 10 of those were applicable for the limited banners. To put it bluntly, the first anniversary was not good. The community rallied once they figured out how this content was essentially just another patch in the content cycle, not much of an anniversary celebration, especially because later on, players found out that there was a special event that provided further pulls for players that were pulling for the banners during the anniversary. What if you didn't want Zanny and wanted to skip for other units? Well, I guess you're out of luck. Oh, and to rub salt on the wound, the rerun banners still abides by the 50-50 rule, so players could walk out with a shiny lion boy as opposed to the character they actually wanted. Some might argue that this particular banner was targeted towards whales. However, that might be a bit of a stretch since whales don't really need rerun banners of this caliber if they already got the units they wanted, especially with the added risk of losing the rate up. The only incentive whales had towards buying anything was the top-up bonus reset, and that's about it. The backlash was swift and merciless, with players pointing at Kuro's inability to live up to the players' expectations. While the anniversary still offered some content that players could indulge in, it wasn't good enough for a lot of people who expected rewards on par with what they got in prior versions. This issue was acknowledged by Kuro Games themselves in a follow-up post shortly after the stream was aired. I talked about how there was much room for improvement to support the game in the long term. Because of this, they added another event that provided 30 more pulls and the anniversary came and went, leaving players with mixed feelings towards the patch all around. Over the course of the rest of version 2.0 and the beginning of version 3, they have slowly continued to show its goal of helping players despite the misgivings of the first anniversary. They added new features such as ray tracing, several graphical improvements, and their characters became a lot more visually impactful, while the story sequences continued to up its production values. The climactic end of the Renacida arc in 2.7 was one of the biggest highlights of the year for one. However, one more sticking point began to surface as the game continued to grow, quite literally. The game's file size. Wuthering Waves now has become notoriously infamous for having the biggest file size across mobile and PC, to the point where players have been forced to quit the game even after making several compromises to delete other games. The humongous file size is also coupled with a bunch of optimization issues that, despite making the game look absolutely crisp, also make the game have massive performance drops in terms of graphics on mid to low-end PCs, or turn phones into an atomic fire hazard. So now we fast forward to today to see what the second anniversary will do to correct the mistakes made during the first one. We have the ever-present poll count with new optimizations the game will bring, and of course the upcoming Cyberpunk collaboration. There's a lot of stuff that will be added here, so let's break it down one by one. Before I go into the new features, I would like to point out that players will be receiving up to 40 polls during the patch. While this is acceptable by the standards of a normal patch, many believe it doesn't match up to expectations for an anniversary. There weren't any sort of character selectors, so I can understand the disappointment there. I'm not going to deny or redirect the concerns, because I do think there's room for improvement as well. First, let's take a look at the overall situation of the second anniversary. First of all, ignoring the celebrations, from the perspective of version 3.3 itself, the update content is quite satisfying. There's the two new resonators for the patch, Hiyuki and Denia, the former of which is the first major Glacio DPS since Carlotta all the way in 2.0. Hiyuki focuses on the Glacio chaff mechanic alongside the recently introduced Toon Strain. She has very strong combat capabilities and can cover a huge area of effect with her powerful attacks, and changes the whole environment when you use her liberation. Meanwhile, Denia focuses on Fusion Burst, becoming an ideal companion for one of the marquee characters of version 3.x. Denia also possesses two forms which aid Toon Break characters or Fusion Burst characters. This game will add a new map themed after something akin to a winter wonderland. This will introduce new 4-cost echoes and 2 Sonata sets alongside fresh gameplay content such as new courses for the motorbike. Other events include the return of the Cube minigames that add more fun for casual players. Of course, the story will also be expanded in this update with the climactic finale of the recent storyline. They have done a great effort to also reduce the game's file size. Now, after cutting the file size to close to 40 gigabytes after getting rid of resources that won't be used anymore, players should be able to return to the game across all their devices rather than be forced to quit or using cloud devices. Additional features allow further cuts to the game's basic download resources to less than 30 gigabytes. After discussing the strengths, let's now look at some of the existing issues. In my opinion, the biggest problem for this update is that the anniversary atmosphere feels somewhat lacking. I understand the dissatisfaction and concerns from players. With any celebration of a game, a large number of new players are expected to join, and there's generally a strong need to expand character rosters. At the same time, as the game enters its third year, early characters have less room to reappear or are likely to be power crept. Given this context, compared to the first anniversary, it's reasonable for the second one to introduce a larger scale rerun banner. At the same time, the rerun system could be further optimized. For example, implementing guaranteed rate-ups without off-banner outcomes or other exclusive anniversary benefits. Another option would be to gradually add older 1.x characters to the standard banner pool. This is actually my biggest wish for the game for it to easily outshine the competition. At this point, we can also take a look at the positives. Compared to the first anniversary, the amount of polls given has increased slightly. Players can dedicate more resources to the feature banner or prepare for the upcoming collabs and the new region characters. I do think the time has come for older characters to return or receive buffs. I can only hope these are planned at some point going forward. Looking back over the past 2 years, we can clearly see that the game has been steadily growing and improving. And as I've said in previous videos, I have no problems recommending the game overall. Regardless of how you feel with the anniversary, it may be worthwhile to enjoy the considerable amounts of free content and new additions the patch has to offer. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the history of Wuthering Waves' anniversary history, and thank you to Coral Games for sponsoring this video. You can use the link in the description to try out the game, and for those that are on PC, the game is also available on Steam. Again, while I do think there are still some minor flaws with the game, I don't have any problems recommending it as an open world game to get lost in. So thank you for tuning in, be sure to spend moderately, and have fun out there.